Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of What the Field. I'm Emmeline, and today I'm here with Maria Correa, Head of Comms and Community Engagement at B Europe, which is the institution behind the B Corp certification. So, Maria, please tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and what B does.
Perfect. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me on this podcast. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're very happy to have you.
So, as you mentioned, I head up communications and community engagement for B Europe. So, B Europe is the nonprofit behind the B Corp movement. Our vision is to transform the global economic system to create a more inclusive, equitable, and regenerative society for all. So it's a very big mission.
Yeah.
On a day-to-day basis, we're best known for our work with the B Corp certification, which is basically an assessment that looks at a company's societal and environmental impact and promotes more accountability and transparency in the business world.
Yes, I think it's quite a famous one, actually, and it's become, for me personally, like the little bee with the circle around it. It's become like the seal to look out for if I want to know, is the company serious about their sustainability efforts or not? For those of us who don't know what a B Corp certification means, maybe you can get a little bit into that, explain what does it take for a company to get such a certification, to be able to use the little B on their products?
For sure. So it's quite a rigorous assessment. Currently, there's 3 main requirements to become a B Corp. First, the company needs to do the B impact assessment, or we also call it the BIA, which basically requires a company to answer a series of different questions across 5 different impact areas. So it looks at a company's impact on the environment, how it treats its workers, the benefit it provides for customers, the impact it has in the communities in which it operates, and also the way the company itself is governed. And then the company is also required to change its legal articles of incorporation. So most companies traditionally are structured in a way that's profit driven. So focused on kind of the benefit for their shareholders.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do is shift towards a stakeholder governance model of business where, of course, profits are important, but ultimately a business should operate to benefit all people, communities, and the planet. So B Corps are required to change the way that they're incorporated to really embed their purpose in everything that they do. And then the last requirement is on transparency. So once a company is able to certify their impact results, where they stand, the areas in which they're doing well and where they need improvement, that's all publicly shared on their public profiles in the B Corp directory. So any individual can go and learn more about that company, where they're doing well, and businesses are required to recertify every 3 years. So it's quite a process. And of course, after the company completes the assessment, our analysts verify that information. There's risk reviews. The company is required to submit a lot of evidence to the questions that they've provided. And so if they meet the minimum requirements of high standards of social and environmental impact, which currently is a minimum score of 80, then that company is eligible to certify.
Okay, so you work on a score basis from 1 to 100, sounds like, right?
Yes. So, well, there's a possible 200 score. To certify, companies reach 80, need to reach a minimum verified score of 80. And some of the highest B Corps have 160, 170. We don't yet have anyone with 200.
With 200? Sorry, who would be the highest scoring companies? Would I know them? Would we know them?
Some of them. So Patagonia, of course, is one of the best known B Corps.
Yeah.
And their score is around 150. I'd need to check. But there are a few higher scoring B Corps as well. But I think one thing we'd like to emphasize as well is, of course, the score creates a benchmark for companies to see how they're performing and to compare against others in their industry and others in their country. But ultimately, like, no company is perfect. So every company still has more that they can improve as well. So we do try to not focus so much on the score and focus on the collective impact that that company can provide too.
Okay. Maria, you were mentioning that after 3 years, the certification is basically being reevaluated to make sure that the company is still worthy of it, to put it that way.
Yeah.
What happens in those 3 years, like until that point? Is there any control mechanism? You're mentioning companies have to publish their progress, I guess, or publish reports of how they're doing on the different, like the social front, the environmental front. But is there any follow-up from your side, or is there any basically a control mechanism in place that makes sure that they're just not publishing whatever data they can fabricate and it's not actually true?
Yeah, that's a great question. So indeed, the certification happens every 3 years. The company, in regards to their B Corp certification, they can only publish their latest verified information. But one thing that we like to reinforce as well is the certification itself is a framework for continuous improvement. So once the company has completed that assessment, they can see clearly which areas they're performing well in, which areas there's room for improvement, where they want to focus their energy over those next 3 years. But beyond kind of the certification, they're also now a part of a community. And I think the accountability comes just as much from the certification itself as it does from the community that holds them accountable to continue to perform, to challenge each other, to collaborate to solve certain issues within their industry. And then when they recertify, they can publish their new scores and their new assessment transparently. But we do that every 3 years.
Okay, great. And I was also wondering whether the requirements differ depending on the country, because I would imagine that each country has kind of a different framework, let's say, because policies are not the same. I mean, throughout the European Union, they're more or less, but you also work in other territories, right? And even within the European Union, is there a difference being a German B Corp certified company and, I don't know, Czech one or English one, or well, England is not part of the European Union anymore, but a French one, whatever, you know what I mean? Like,
sure.
It would just, I think it's interesting to see, since the labor laws and all of these things are so different from country to country, whether that influences the certification in a way.
Of course, and it's incredibly difficult to try to create a global certification and global standards across the board. But it's also a challenge because there's so many different labels and so many different standards, which is confusing for consumers and investors and businesses. So our aim really is to create a universal standard that applies to companies across different industries, across different geographies. There is a certain amount of flexibility within the assessment, depending on a company's size and depending on their industry as well. So, for example, if a company is in the agriculture industry, they go through a slightly different track and have different questions that are a bit more relevant to their industry. And then regarding kind of the geographical differences, in some instances, there are a few differences. So, for example, when it comes to living wages and fair wages, there's different benchmarks in different parts of the world. So that's taken into account within the certification process. But we try to not create a lot of variables because otherwise you can't really compare businesses. So we look to kind of define what unites B Corps and what are the kind of standards that can be applied across the board and across industries as much as possible.
Okay, great. So what would you say to critics that are, because there's a lot of, let's say, certification skeptics out there that say because you do need to put some financial effort behind achieving any kind of certification, especially things like organic certification, for example, is very expensive for a lot of farmers. I know that, I mean, we're also trying to get B Corp, so we also know there's like payment involved, obviously, because, I mean, you're not doing it for free either. But then there's these critics saying, okay, these certifications, like, how much are they really worth? If companies need to pay to get them, couldn't it be like kind of an underhand, like, I don't know how to say it diplomatically, like an underhanded thing of, okay, I'm giving you enough money and you hand over the certification type of thing? Like,
Yeah.
what do you say to these types of criticisms?
For anybody who's gone through the process of B Corp certification, it's really rigorous. There's a lot of paperwork involved, and
Yeah, I
there's a
can
lot of
confirm.
time involved in that. It's definitely not something that can be bought.
Yeah.
And because of the time and rigor that it takes to verify all of those certifications, to go through that analysis process, that's what the cost is going to. So we need to be able to also resource ourselves to be able to provide that certification, be able to constantly improve our own tools and our own standards. So that's what the money is going to. But if you look at demand for certification, for B Corp certification alone, the demand has increased in over 38% over the last 2 years. So we actually have more companies in our pipeline than we do certified B Corps. We've just reached 6,000 B Corps all over the world. There's over 1,000 in the EU and 2,000 if you include the UK, so across the entire European continent.
That's impressive.
Yeah, it's exciting to see that growth in the movement. But I think, if we were just driven by money, we would, open the floodgates. But
Yes.
we do need to keep that credibility and diligence and be able to offer that service to truly verify all of the companies that pursue certification.
What are your star companies, the ones that have like the highest score within B Corp?
I mean, there's a lot of different. I think the beauty of the B Corp community is there's.
You don't want to play favorite. It's like asking a mother, "What's your favorite child?"
It's true. It's true. Especially not officially recorded on a podcast.
Okay, let's just skip this.
But I would say the beauty of the B Corp community is there's so many different types of businesses, and every business has a different role to play. So I think the B Corps in the community that I admire most are the ones that have put competition aside, that truly embrace the spirit of interdependence and collaboration with other companies within their industry, who are looking to kind of come together to tackle problems in their supply chain, or come together to address issues like climate action or circular waste. So I think those are the examples that I love the most, without naming any names.
Well done. So staying a bit on the path of the critics, let's say, in this line of questioning, another very common reproach for certifications is that companies are using certifications basically for greenwashing. First of all, I would love to know, how do you define greenwashing? Because it's like a very overly used term now, and I would love to know it. Like, for someone like B Corp, what does greenwashing even mean? What do you see as greenwashing?
So greenwashing to me is any organization that's making misleading claims, whether that's verbally or through the visual imagery that they're using, but that's sending a misleading message out in the world about their social or environmental performance. And that can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. It might be explicit, or it might be just by making vague claims about the planet that can be confusing for a consumer, or for an individual, I should say, about what that company is actually doing.
Yeah. So then moving on to like the second part of the question, which was whether it's justified to be afraid of certifications being used for greenwashing purposes.
Yeah, so I think first off, the track to becoming a B Corp has never been and will never be kind of a greenwashing exercise because of all of the work that goes behind it. So everything that a company needs to submit in order to pursue that certification, the fact that information is then verified, and the company is also subject to risk reviews beyond the questions that the company is answering in their own kind of certification process. We also have other systems in place to verify a company's negative impact. So a lot of people don't know. So many of the other aspects of certification. So, for example, every company completes a disclosure questionnaire where they have to answer questions about kind of the negative impacts of their operations. And in some cases, by disclosing that information, a company is required to remediate those issues or disclose what they've already done to remediate those issues. In some cases, it might mean they're ineligible for certification. So there is quite a lot of rigor and thought into that process. All of that being said, no company is perfect, and certification doesn't guarantee that. And I think there's sometimes that expectation that because the company is a B Corp, they can do no harm. And I think what we really see is the certification is a mechanism for continuous improvement, for accountability and transparency. And so we hope that, by engaging in the certification and by becoming a part of the community, that company is then committed to continuously improve their impact and, again, is held accountable by our own assessment and by the community and by the general public. And the last bit is we also do have a public complaints process. So any of the stakeholders of that organization can also submit a public complaint about that company that's then investigated. So there's a lot of different systems in place to address any greenwashing claims.
Or are you experiencing a lot of failed applications?
I think on average, 40% of the companies that pursue certification actually go on to certify.
Oh, wow. So there are a lot of dropouts, or not sure I should name them.
Well, I think it's hard to meet, we really do try to set high standards for certification without making it inaccessible. So I think a lot of companies initially pursue certification and then have to go back and introduce new policies or continue to work on their impact until the point that they're ready to submit their application. But our aim is to help all companies go on that journey, and our tools are actually available for anybody to use whether or not they're pursuing certification. So any company can take the B impact assessment and work to improve their impact.
Would you say that it's easier for companies that have a lot of money basically behind them to achieve B Corp status? Is it the point of entry? Is it high for smaller companies?
I mean, the B Corp community, I think, initially started really led by the pioneering, purpose-driven, small, medium enterprises that were really leading the way. And those companies are still make up the majority of our community, between 70 to 85% in different parts of the world. I think the challenge we hear from some of the smaller companies are the resources it takes to put in place some of these practices and the resources it takes to truly measure your environmental impact and put those procedures in place as well. So some of the smaller companies have a bit more challenges with that, especially if their teams are less than 10 people. But we do see quite a few companies do that. I think on the flip side, while some of the larger companies have more resources to measure and track their impact, they also have a lot more subsidiaries, for example, or a lot more offices. So they need to complete different assessments for all of their different offices. So it's a lot harder of a process. And there also are some additional requirements for large enterprises and multinationals. So I wouldn't say it's easier for them, even though they do have some of the financial and team resources to help them on that journey.
Yeah. Speaking of corporates and big companies, are there companies that you say you wouldn't work with? Or can you imagine that even more controversial companies such as maybe, I don't know, Amazon, that were not exactly famous for great working conditions, let's say, drivers. Would you ever think to include someone a company like Amazon or, I don't even know, Coca-Cola or other big brands or big names that have kind of bad fame almost in the sustainability world or social justice world?
I think there's a natural tension out in the world to want to exclude certain businesses from things like certifications, but also wanting to tackle something massive like creating systems change and really transforming the role of business in the world, and really trying to address these massive global issues that we're facing today with the climate crisis, with inequalities. And that's a really big tension on how do you go about doing that. And in order to achieve that, you do need to get everybody on board. We're not going to solve these problems if we're just talking to a few niche companies in the world. That being said, I think some of these multinationals are a long way away from certifying. But I think one question I'd ask back to you and to your audiences as well is, if we're truly serious about transforming, about, using business as a force for good, and this idea that businesses can, they're a huge part of the problem, but they can also be a part of the solution. If we truly believe that, then we want to transform the economic system. So we need to get a lot of these companies, especially the ones that are most responsible for the problems, to transform the way that they operate and come on board on this impact improvement journey. Currently, we do have some stances for certain industries. So we have a couple controversial industries where either they're ineligible for certification, like fossil fuel companies, or they have to complete, different requirements in order to certify. So I wouldn't say that any company is completely ineligible for life. I think they have a long way to go, but I think we would hope that eventually, many years from now, if a company like that is able to not just operate in a profit-driven machine, but to be able to really take into account the interests of all of their stakeholders, of the environment, of the customers, of the community, into account in their decision-making, that would solve a lot of the issues that we're facing today. So I think we also need to embrace and encourage people to go on that journey, whether that means ever being eligible for certification, or just empowering them to go on that impact management journey.
And not be scared of greenwashing claims, because I also feel like it's a legitimate fear of some companies that if they're just gonna do something that might be a little change and not perceived as a big enough change, and then they even dare to talk about it, then they will just receive some sort of public backlash.
Yeah, exactly. I think we live in quite a polarized society, and we need to embrace a bit more empathy and nuance in everything that we do. And I think there's a lot of companies that handle this with a lot of grace and a lot of expertise and humility. One of our B Corps, Tony's Chocolonely, is an incredible example of this. They're committed to ending slavery and child labor in the cocoa supply chain. But they've come out at times and been transparent about when they've identified slavery in their supply chains. And instead of walking away from that supplier, they've worked with different suppliers to implement new practices and really change the way that supplier operates, not just to benefit Tony's, but for all of the other companies that they supply to. So we're only going to solve these problems if we really get every company to transform. So hopefully I think
that's a beautiful way to end this podcast. But I did have one last question, which is, what is your biggest lesson, or what was your biggest lesson working at an organization such as B Lab and working with the B Corp certification, maybe?
I think what B Lab and the B Corp community have really taught me is about the importance of the spirit of interdependence. We're not going to solve any problem alone. The certification helps companies transform their own operations, but it's only when companies then come together to transform the industries that they operate in, the policies in the countries in which they operate, that we're actually going to solve these problems. And also the interdependence between the problems that we're trying to solve. So if you just look at emissions, or if you just look at a company's environmental impact, that doesn't tell the whole story, because there's also huge impacts to society and inclusivity and inequality that are very closely related to the planet. So I think also with that spirit of interdependence also comes the interdependence of people and the planet. And I think B Lab and the B Corp community has really taught me about the importance of that and the importance of collaboration in trying to tackle these momentous problems that we're trying to solve.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So it's interconnectedness, and no one has to do it on their own type of mentality, right? No one can do it on their own.
Indeed, and I think crowd farming is a great example of this, of all of the different partners and other people that you bring into the ecosystem to help really change the food industry as well. So I think that beauty of collaboration within industries is ultimately what gives me hope.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful note to end this podcast on. Thank you so much, Maria, for sitting down with me and making me a little wiser about B Corp and all that it entails. And thank you also to our audience for being with us for another episode. I hope you enjoyed this little field trip to the world of B Corp and greenwashing. And yeah, until next time, bye.
Thank you so much.